It's the 13th of February, day 496 since October the 7th, the 26th day of the ceasefire. And today we're going to be looking at the fifth prisoner exchange of phase one of the ceasefire. And this prisoner exchange took place in Dar al-Balah, where Abu Bakr was just talking about. And it's the seventh separate location that Qassam has done these handovers from the south in Khan Yunis to the north of the Jabalia camp on the border with Beit Lahia, which is where the third exchange was. So we're seeing this organization across Gaza, and I think that's something to note before we watch this. So there's going to be some audio here for the first few seconds of slide number 1, Tamara. So I just wanted to give you a little clip of the soundtrack of this video. Again, high production value, significant, a lot of significant details in this video. And you can see this is the shadow unit getting their directive. And like Tarek Azoum from Al Jazeera said while reporting this on Saturday morning, the car emerges out of nowhere. These are not long convoys of cars. Again, I've removed the prisoners from here following the Third Geneva Convention. I don't think that we should be showing them on either side. So we're going to continue to not do that. But you can see this is in Dar al-Balah. You can see the commander talking, and he says directly, he addresses Israel directly. He says, please, I address you, continue implementing the second phase of the deal and try to get everyone out. There are a lot of prisoners with the Al-Qassam brigades, and I want all the prisoners to return home. Continue implementing the second and third phases. So that's what the commander's saying there. And you can see him, he's standing in front of martyr posters of the commanders from the Central Division, Central Brigade of the Qassam brigades. And that's Ayman Nofel in particular. He was killed early in the war. And Marwan Issa, who was the deputy to Mohammed al-Daif and really the operations chief. And he's from Al-Barej, which is in the middle camps as well. So you're seeing the handover again, hundreds, if not thousands of fighters on the ground in a completely separate location. And we've been pointing this out all throughout the war, that the fighters operate in territorial units. They're not running around Gaza. And now we're seeing that being the case here again, the demonstration that these prisoners are being held in different places throughout Gaza. They're being held by the shadow units. Qassam's making a statement in these videos. Israel is watching these videos in detail. And you can see that the camera's not focusing in on things for very long. I did notice I skipped the map tomorrow. Maybe we could throw the map up now just to give people a sense. I was going to lead with this map, but you can see Dar al-Balah in the central area there, and the key landmarks. That's the Netzarim corridor that divides the north from the south. Gaza City, Zaytun is Gaza City, just to the north there. And you can see the main camps, Nusrat camp, which is where the raid was to the massacre to rescue those 3 captives, was the only rescue of captives throughout the entire war. You can see the Barej refugee camp, Al-Maghazi refugee camp, and Dar al-Balah, which predates, is not a camp, has camps in it, but it is not, it is itself part of historic Gaza, as Abu Bakr was talking about. So just to give you a sense, and south of Khan Yunis is Rafah. So we normally focus in on, and the main reason was something that Abu Bakr pointed out, was that Dar al-Balah did not experience the total destruction invasion that defined the other places in Gaza. And so we haven't focused that much on the middle camps, but we will today, because there's a couple interesting details in this that I want to point out to everybody. So let's look at number 2. Because this is the thing. So the shadow unit, I gave a breakdown last show on the shadow unit. This is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 unit in charge of the prisoners. It was set up in 2006 after the capture of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐤𝐿 under the command of Mohammed Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's brother, who was a commander in Khan Yunis and is now one of the top commanders, if potentially the top commander of Qassam. We'll see how this all unfolds in the months ahead. Um, but the shadow unit reported directly to Mohammed al-Daif, who Qassam acknowledged was killed earlier in the war, believed to have been killed in July last summer in the war. But so we're seeing the shadow unit also the same way as the territorial units, because now we're seeing shadow unit in Dar al-Bala. So that's an interesting detail to note. This exchange of prisoners was 3 captives, Israeli captives, for 183 Palestinians. 73 of them had life or long sentences, and 111 of them were people captured in Gaza. No charges against them, not even a pretense of there being charges against them, captured as bargaining chips and sent to torture camps in southern Israel, like City Taman, which will be, I'm sure there'll be books and reports written for decades on the torture that went on in those camps. And so it's just brutal. And people in Gaza celebrated so much for the 111 people that were returned to Gaza. The celebrations with fireworks and gunfire actually set off Israel's Iron Dome. So the Iron Dome fired missile interceptors into the air because the celebration in Gaza was so significant for the prisoners. So just a couple notes on the shadow unit. So the attempt, this in the first phase of this exchange, this is exchange 5 of, there will be 8 ultimately. If all goes according to plan, and 290 prisoners that are serving life sentences will be released in this first phase, and that's half of the Palestinian prison population that has life sentences, and the Palestinians are attempting to get the other half out in the next stage. So that's when stage 2 negotiations were phase 2 negotiations were supposed to start early last week, and they did not. They are beginning to start, although they're both separate right now. There's talks in Egypt and talks in Doha that are happening. So we'll have to follow that story. But if we look at number 3, this was an interesting shot of the tunnels. These 3 prisoners that were released, they spoke about being in the tunnels the whole time after the raid in Nusrat. And the raid in Nusrat was the massacre of 275 Palestinians. More than 700 were wounded. Take on an Israeli raid into an apartment where Israelis were living above ground with a family. And so after those raids, which was predicted, the prisoners were taken underground and spent the rest of their time underground. But I pulled this from the video because it's a really interesting shot of the tunnel network, and you can see the way that it's built. You can see the size of it, and it's just a good indication of it. That arch system is the trick to the engineering of the tunnel systems, and that's where it gets its durability from, its resilience from. It's able to move a little bit to so that it doesn't buckle under the pressure of sand or airstrikes or flooding. So it's an interesting shot. And if we look at this next slide, you can see the blast door. And so for the Israeli military, they weren't really ever fighting in these tunnels, because you can see just by this single picture from this one video from the prisoner exchange, that blast door is very difficult to get into. It's sealed, and the tunnel can't be flooded. The tunnel can't be raided. That has to be blown up by the Israelis to get to the other side of the door. And if you look above the door, you can see that was the area I showed a few times over the course of the war. Qassam booby trapping these tunnels, and that's when they would put radia and television IEDs built by Qassam. They would build them into the walls all around there. And so when you see pictures like this, you just really see The fact that Israel was not down in these tunnels fighting, we would have seen the footage. We just saw the footage from Qassam showing the prisoners leaving the tunnel. There's no reason why they wouldn't have footage of the fighting in the tunnel. But I think we'll find in the coming years that Israel also lied about the extent to which they fought in the tunnels. And I just wanted to bring you those couple shots from there that I think are super interesting about the engineering of the tunnels. If we look at number 5, you got the stage again. We have a completely different stage in Deir al-Balah than we had in the previous ones, but this one is just as potent. It says, "We are the flood." A reference to the Al-Aqsa flood operation. And it says, "We are the day after," in reference to the day after plan of the Biden administration, of the Israelis, of everybody talking about the day after for Gaza and not talking about Gazans. And this is Qassam saying that we are the day after, and they survived the war underneath. They survived the war intact and achieved all of their goals of the war so far, and Israel has not, which is something that 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿, who is the author of the General's Plan, admitted just the other day that that Israel's only achieved a quarter of one of their 4 goals, and Qassam reached all 4 of them. We can maybe discuss that in the discussion after, but underneath the stage it says absolute victory in Hebrew, and it's got the red triangle on it with Sad Netanyahu being defeated of his absolute victory with the red triangle. And you can see the destroyed Merkava tank there. That was in Jabalia. That wasn't the one that I showed a couple weeks ago from Beit Hanun. So they have multiple photos of tanks with their barrels blown off, the turret toss that I described. So another solid stage, a solid messaging. And then number 6, in the crowd, this was just a subtle thing. But again, the Israelis noticed it right away, because there's messaging to both. There's messaging to the Israelis, and we'll see coming up, there's messaging to Palestinians as well. So they noticed that this rifle, which is an Israel Weapons Industries Negev Special Forces light machine gun, or squad automatic weapon, as the Americans would call it, fires 800 rounds a minute. And on the ammunition drum underneath his index finger there, that's the ammunition drum, and it's got markings on it of the Israeli soldier who was killed in the raid on the Kisifim IDF base on October 7th, raided by Nukba forces and took over that base. And they captured his light machine gun and brought it home. And before we saw this, we had never seen this footage before. And there's, in Israel, the soldier whose name is on that rifle. He's one of the hero stories of October 7th. They framed it as a hero story. That he, when everybody else ran and hid in the Israeli soldiers all ran and hid in their bomb shelters, this one soldier stayed out and fired 675 rounds before he was overtaken by Nukba forces in Kisifim base. And so they had hyped him up to be this big hero. So when Qassam released or showed this photo, this was just a quick, like 1 second in that video. You probably didn't even notice it. But the Israelis noticed it, and they noticed that that was his gun. The military censor went right to work to say that was just his ammunition drum. They didn't have his rifle as well, but we know that's not the case. Although we do know that Qassam has gotten that particular type of Negev light machine gun in a number of situations. We saw one in Beit Hanun. We even saw the Mujahideen brigades capture one of them, and that's not that surprising. Each squad has 2 of these light machine guns in it, so it comprises 20% of an Israeli squad's weapons. So it makes sense that these weapons were captured. And so interesting point that the Israelis definitely noticed right away and pointed out that that was his rifle. So, and then if we look at number 7, we have this is communicating with Gazans on this Yassin warhead. It's also a good shot of a Yassin warhead. We often see them as they're being deployed, but there it is just sitting there. And it says Dawar al-Halak, which essentially means watch yourself. And it's an allusion to an operation. And if we show that operation next here, number 8, this was by the Barrage Battalion. Number 8, video 8, is it up? So the Barrage Battalion is one of 4 in the Central Brigade. Maghazi Battalion, Nusrat Battalion, Dar al-Bala Battalion, and the Barrage Battalion. Yeah, I do want to play it. Let's play number 8. So this is an operation that I showed you this back in November. These fighters are digging out a tactical tunnel in Barrage. In November, the Israelis invaded Barrage on the outskirts of the central camps, and they were met by this tunnel operation. That was a pretty epic series of those guys tunneled out and then hit these 3 vehicles in a row. They hit 2 D9 bulldozers, one with a Yasin 105. This is with an RPG-7 that he gets him right in the back with an RPG-7, which is a devastating weapon. And then we're going to see our 3rd fighter here emerge from the tunnel. So he says, Dawar Halak, like watch yourself. And that was a sort of a one of those verses that we heard, like analyze this was one of those, analyze this Duwari, call the tow truck was famous too from people. And that was, it's a saying that's essentially says, watch yourself, watch out for yourself, keep your head up. And they hit them. And then that fighter in the previous still is holding his weapon with a sticker on it that says the same thing. So these subtle things, they're communicating with the Israelis, but they're also communicating with their local audience and with people in Gaza. So that was just one little note from the Barrage Battalion that was at the Central Brigade prisoner exchange number 5. So number 6 is due to happen on Saturday morning, local time in Gaza. We'll talk more about it in the discussion because there's still some questions about whether it's going to happen because Israel is not fulfilling its obligations, and 𝐄𝐿 has noted that. And Trump has said a bunch of things about how Trump and Netanyahu both have said a bunch of things about how all the captives have to be handed over on Saturday, and just really muddying the waters of what is a well organized and detailed agreement that both sides agreed to and were guaranteed by the US as well.